And we are recording.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Keith Rutsart, and tonight we're going to talk about the giant kelp restoration project. And this is also talk about the Central Coast Urchin Experiment. That's a reef check experiment we're doing in the Central Coast, and volunteer diver opportunities. So this meeting is primarily for divers, and so we're going to have some ways that you can get involved in urchin removal on the Central Coast. This is me. My name is Keith Rutsart. I'm a PADI dive master, and I also do some things with reef, and I'm a level 5 fish expert. I have a card that says I'm a fish expert, pretty cool card to have. And I am a Reef Check California contract training instructor. I train reef check divers how to do the underwater protocols that we do. And some of you may know me from the Beach Hopper 2. Mary Jo is captain and I'm crew on a lot of days, and here I am speaking to people in front of the Hopkins dive site and explaining about the sanctuary. And on the bottom picture, you can see where I'm explaining about the dangerous sharks that they're going to encounter in the waters there. So this discussion tonight. So why are there urchin barrens, right? That's a big question, you know. And what is the situation in Monterey in particular? And can removing the urchins restore the kelp habitat that many divers are used to seeing in Monterey? And talk about the urchin experiment that we did and conclusions from that experiment, and efforts on the North Coast. There was a lot of the San Jose flipper dippers are longtime free divers, and they're used to ab fishing up north, and so we definitely want to touch on efforts there along this same problem that they have on the North Coast. And lastly, how can divers participate in this activity? So what happened was there was unprecedented events that happened in 2013. We had a sea star wasting disease that came to Monterey. We had a warm water blob. In 2014 and 2015, we had a Godzilla El Nino that came. And in conjunction with that, we had a high recruitment of purple urchins. And we also found out that there is also red urchin recruitment at that same time. So looking at these things in detail, we see in 2013 that the sea star wasting disease took out the sunflower star. We all used to love the sunflower star. They were really big, they'd be 3 feet in diameter, and they would eat urchins. And you can see how in all of the reef check regions in 2014, their numbers just declined to 0, and to the point where they are locally extinct now. And people have seen little ones, but they usually succumb to sea star wasting disease or something. We don't see large ones anymore like we used to. Anyways, in 2015, there was a warm water blob of water that just kind of came and sat on the North American West Coast for about a year and a half. Very warm. At Breakwater, for instance, the water was 67 degrees for about 3 months in that summer. So very warm conditions. And at the same time, it just happened, the bad luck, there's this El Nino that came at that same time. So the El Nino effect was compounded the problem of the warm water heat wave. And you can see that black line, how it just got so much warmer than usual. And when the El Nino happens like that, when you get warm water and you don't get the upwelling. You know, what's the nice thing about Monterey is we have these deep canyons that provide all this upwelling and cold water, and that's nutrient-rich water that comes into the bay, and that's what feeds all of the nutrients for the kelp that we enjoy here. So, but that was the 2014 blob, and in 2019 there was a threat of another blob, which should make another warm water event, but that was fake news. So we don't necessarily believe that. The purple urchin boom recruitment started happening in 2013. We have to kind of look at the size of urchins to tell when they are born. In 2015, we see that the majority of them were 3 centimeter urchins. And this is all taken from Coral Street, a very popular dive site. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. And 3 centimeters seems to be the dominant size. So, but a 3 centimeter urchin was born 2 years previous to that. So here in 2019, you'll notice, so this is the 3 centimeter in 2015, but in 2019, we saw that there's a new 2 centimeter cohort that came upon our site. So there's a new birth and a whole nother wave of urchins kind of coming to be, another urchin pulse recruitment. And 2 centimeters, this is their first year. So that just happened in 2019. And to kind of look at it in some more detail, you'll see that this blue line is how the purple urchins were in 2018. And if you look at the 2 centimeter line in particular, you'll see that in 2018 there were some here, but then in 2019 there was much more. On this green line, they increased. And on our urchin experiment, we experienced the same thing. We saw that this 2 centimeter pulse come through our targets. I'll talk more about the experiment later, but I want to get you some idea of what urchin sizing distribution looks like. This is what a red urchin size distribution looks like. They're larger than the purples, and they have their wave is much higher. But you also see this 2 centimeter recruitment of red urchins as well. This is all 2019 data. So what happened in the canopy around the peninsula? I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. You've been diving it for some time. There was a very thick canopy of kelp all around the coast. It was thick. You had to be careful. You want to save air at the end of your dive so that you could make it back to shore, back to the boat. We had what we call the kelp crawl, where people would tell people if you get stuck in kelp, how to crawl over it and not lose your camera in the process. We don't even talk about that anymore on the Beach Hopper. We just tell them just come back to the boat. It doesn't even come up. Just follow your buddy if you want. It's very thin these days, and this is how in 2017. And this is 10 years later. It's the same time of the year. I'm not cherry picking my data or anything, but you can see how there's not that much kelp left. The only kelp that's really left is there's a little bit over here by Otter Cove, had a little bit, and right at Breakwater along the wall, and in the Middle Reef, and at Hidden Beach, and some of these areas along Cannery Row. But the kelp has receded from the barrens that are here and is now closer to shore. And Hopkins has a little bit that goes around on that side. And what it basically is, if I talk a little bit about kelp here, is that in Monterey we have giant kelp. That's our dominant species. And giant kelp is a canopy-forming kelp. It forms a large canopy, and when it forms that large canopy, it shades out the bull kelp. Bull kelp is a different species where the macrocystis is a perennial. Bull kelp is an annual. It's like a grass. It has to come back every year and start over from spores. But once the giant kelp is formed, the bull kelp, the Nereocystis, becomes less dominant because it gets shaded out by the canopy. But in other areas of California, bull kelp is the dominant species. On the north coast, bull kelp is the dominant species. We have both here, but giant kelp is the dominant species. Also understory kelps as well, like Pterogophora and Laminaria. And I'm not going to speak too much about those. I'm mostly this is about the kelp canopy, because once that is gone, then these other turf algae will end up, when there's an urchin barren, these algae will go as well. Let's see here. So in Monterey, the urchin densities, we started watching with Reef Check. We count them. We go and count urchins. We count everything. And we started seeing that there's more urchins. In 2013, this is the idea of what kind of the baseline is, how there's a little bit of urchin barrens, a little bit of urchin density in these sites. These are all the Reef Check sites. And then we started seeing more of them. Here's 2014. See, there's more at these sites. 2015, even more at some of these sites. And 2016. Well, you kind of get the idea. It's more urchins at more of our sites, and more of the Reef Check sites we're seeing are turning from kelp forests into urchin barrens. And this is not just Monterey. I want to take a step back from the satellite view that this is happening all over the world. Urchin barrens form in South America. There's no places really that are immune from having urchin barrens on them. A little bit about urchins. Urchins, this is like, it has an open circulatory system. It has these little gonads on them. This is the part that people like to eat as uni. This is the sushi right here, which is a gonad. And as they come on a barren and they're starving and they're looking for kelp, these gonads are shrunken. They kind of self-consume their own gonad. And they have these little plates around in their test. They're a hard shell, but as they are starving, they can actually degrow and become smaller on the barren. This graph you see right here is all the purple urchins on the Reef Check surveys, and you can see how it's some places got it sooner than others, some places got it more than others. Some of them got the barrens and then they went away, and then some kelp came back, and we're not in the epicenter of this problem. We're in an area with a high amount of variability. We have some kelp, and the urchins are moving like a mass around the South Monterey Bay and Carmel, eating up these areas and kind of moving around. And so it's real kind of erratic and patchy as the urchins go along. But overall, if you add up all of the density over time, this is what purple urchins are doing. They're becoming exponentially more urchins on our sites. The baseline was, I was going to throw a number out there. It's a real number, but it's 0.04 purple urchins per square meter. So that means that you would go 25 square meters and only find one purple urchin. But now you'll find 21 urchins in 1 meter. So that's 500 times what it was before. Just to give you some idea of the growth, the order of magnitude of the growth that we're seeing in Monterey and Carmel Bay. And we have a lot of MPAs in Monterey, and we'd like to think that they're good. As a Reef Check volunteer, I'm diving and trying to count inside and outside the MPAs to see about the effectiveness of the MPAs. But what I've found, in my opinion, is that these MPAs, which we think of as being a wilderness area that safeguard fish to seed the rest of the coast that is not protected, has instead become an urchin barren, and these places are denuded of species, and not a lot of, they're desolate places that are not helping with the rest of the coast and seeding the fishery for the rest of the coast. And
Keith, can we define an MPA yes. for folks that might not know?
Oh, very good, thank you. MPA is a marine protected area, and I can look at this slide here, for example. I'll show you where the MPAs are in Monterey. This is the Monterey Peninsula, and this is where the urchin barrens are. Around Monterey, approximately. No one really maps urchins, but this is our best guess. And looking at densities, it's about 170 million purple urchins around Monterey Bay. But this is where the marine protected areas are. You can see in these little areas here that were designated, Marine Life Protection Act and stakeholders established these areas by agreement that they would be adaptively managed, and by a network they would be able to replenish the fish stocks in the areas that are not protected. So you can see on the peninsula that there's not a whole lot of places that you can get in the water that are not MPAs. You can get over here by the wharf. There's one little area that's not an MPA. And way down south, over here, El Paso Creek is an area that's a barren, that's not an MPA. And this area out here, nobody really dives that. It's very exposed to the northwest swell. Even the Silomar, you have to go on just the best days to get in there. And it's very shallow in here. We never go there on the dive boats or anything. But so it's kind of limited due to the MPAs. So I make that distinction. So, but our scientific collection permit that we did is located here in Pacific Grove, at the Pacific Grove Gardens Marine Protected Area. Yeah. And this is a satellite view provided to me by Meredith McPherson from UC Santa Cruz. This is the Lovers 3 site. I'm sure you might be familiar with it. Here's the point. You can park right over here at the end of this lot, and then there's a little stairway here, and you can go out in the water. And you can see looking through this, you can see right into the water, and you can see that it's an environment of rocks that are surrounded by sand. There's a lot of sand that is in here. The sand moves around in this area, and that rock surrounded by sand is a kind of a unique feature that it helps with the urchin study. Because, okay, what we found is that if you look at the way the kelp was progressing over time here, going up and down, generally for all the reef check sites, that it went from here down to zero pretty much in 2017. It went way down. And the urchins increased on this line. So what you could conclude from that is that they cross. Those two lines cross at 6 urchins per meter squared. So it takes about 6 urchins per meter squared, per square meter, to go from a kelp forest to an urchin barren. But to go back the other way, to go from a urchin barren to a kelp forest, literature suggests, scientific studies suggest that it be an order of magnitude less than that, or 0.6 urchins per square meter would be where you'd have to be for the barren to go the other way. So that is the basis of the design of this experiment. We have 20 experimental plots that are rocks that are surrounded by sand, and we manipulate the number of urchins on the rock with a hammer to lower them to very low densities on a graduated scale. Each of those dots represents a prescription, and there's a big rock and a small rock, and it's randomly distributed. I surveyed all the rocks. I gave them to the scientists, and they randomly selected them. I didn't get to pick my favorites, and that's how that's the prescription right there. This is the timeline of our experiment. I don't want to beleaguer this too much. We did some recon in the beginning, and then our manipulations started in June. We were able to do the initial manipulations, and then all last summer, we went every couple weeks to the targets, and we counted things, and we smashed the urchins that were above the prescription, and we kept putting things back on prescription to see what point would kelp return. And we also did some aerial surveys as well of the kelp canopy. Sorry. So this is the plot. If you look at it here, these little yellow spots are where the targets are. If you swim out there, you will see the little target on the rock. People say, hey, I saw your target. And we drew a little map of a line between them so we can actually go down, find one target, and then swim to the other ones. The little Christmas trees in the graph are where kelp plants were. We located all this by GPS, but they don't have kelp plants in the icons for Google Earth, so I use Christmas trees. So that's what those are. The red lines you see outside of the boundary is a reef check site. So we would do a control what's in the boundary, what's out of the boundary. We want to see what the general environmental response is like out there. And so we surveyed that 3 times. And so far we've done a bunch of those, bunch of passes. We did 8 passes over that time on our targets. So. A little bit specifics about the fun stuff we did out there. So when we went out, we had a sanctuary permit. So we had to make sure we told everybody we were out there doing our work with the research banner. And then went down with epoxy and a bolt and put these little tags on the rocks. And we got recheck divers. Recheck divers are really good at the recheck protocol. They're certified every year. And but this was a little different. We were doing everything on one rock, where usually we have 30 meters to do our work. So we had to form a different method of doing that. And it was our first time, so we all learned. We put little puff balls on the grass there at Lover's Cove, and we all counted them, and then we see how we felt about that and our method of counting. And here we are, we're going out diving. So that's me in the center. There's great divers that dove on this. So here's our divers in the water, going out with their slates, going to go count stuff. And here they are. Let it develop on the screen. And here we are on the shore, and we are dissecting urchins. So why do we dissect the urchins? Well, it turns out that there's some worry that if you were to smash them, that you might cause a spawning event. It's a common it happened in the lab, but it's not scientifically verified that it can happen in the wild. But when the urchins are in their starving state, they don't have genetic material. So we go and dissect them, and we make sure that we only smash them when they score a 0 or a 1 on this chart. So we're making sure that we're not stopping a problem here and creating a problem somewhere else. This is how we modified the protocol. I made these little boards up, but basically we took all of our recheck information and we put it all in one rock, and we just kind of modified it that way. I don't have to go too much into that, but it's just a different way of doing it and how we would perform that. I found all these targets. How do you find something like that? We went with GPS and put a buoy there, drop a line, and we go to the target. Sometimes we do this tricky maneuver where we put a line in between two buoys and stuff, and then we tangled ourselves in it. It didn't work out very well. It's difficult stuff to work underwater. Anyways, here's our method for doing it underwater. We take our tape measures and we lay them out over the rock in two directions. We make like a big plus sign over the rock, and each diver gets a section of that rock. It just to divide work evenly-ish, kind of, and it kind of gives people a bearing too. It's very disorienting underwater to be working with your head down on a rock and know kind of where you are and where you've been. So it helps everybody. So one way is to count everything on the rock and then do the math and then smash the ones that are over that prescription. The other way is to, method B, when it's a small number, is take a number of them off the rock and then smash everything and then put them back, if you can remember. Put them back on the rock. This is an example of here we are at work. We're working on the target here. We got our tape measures down, and we are counting away. And this is some information on the rock. That is this one here. This is a kind of a medium, or there's a low density. It's only 0.15 urchins per meter squared. Only 3 urchins remain on this entire rock when we're through with it. And we keep updating that. We keep going every so often. And what we're kind of looking for is migration, right? Like some urchins are now, next time we go, there's more urchins on the rock. How did they get there? Did they travel over the sand? They don't travel over the sand very much. We'll get a few more on our target. You can see on the 7th pass, and on the 4th pass there's 7. There's a few as we went along. We got less urchin migration as we went along. Where in areas where there's continuous reef, like on the north coast, they've done experiments where they remove urchins, and in 2 weeks later they come back, and it's the same number of urchins. They just fill in like you're just shoveling water, right? They all just come back. You might even get more than you did when you first cleared it 2 weeks before. But here we have sand, so that's unique. Yes?
I was going to say, actually, can you clarify that sand boundary and how that doesn't create a boundary for the urchins?
Well, the urchins just don't like to cross it, and what we see them on the sand sometimes, but we only see large ones on the sand. So, and it seems like they happen, like there's something going on, like a temperature change or something, and we see a lot of them. That's kind of a whole nother study to see when they move, but they do come to the rock, but we only see larger ones, and red ones cross more readily than the purple ones because red urchins are larger than purple urchins. Because when the small ones try to cross, they'll like tumble. They have little feet, and they're not able to make it. So that's why we only see the large ones in the like 4 centimeter size class and larger crossing over on the sand. And what you also see around this target too, just to kind of talk a little more about this, is that the sand dollars. I don't recall seeing so many sand dollars, but there are a lot of sand dollars out there in this area, and you'll see them around breakwater too. People are saying, "I don't remember all those sand dollars out there," but there's a lot of sand dollars, and they're also in the same category. They're Echinodermata, right? There's the same family as the urchins, the same family as the starfish. Here is target 18. This is one has very low density. It has only 2 urchins on the entire rock. And we had a little bit of Macrocystis show up on our site. That was our most successful target out there. And the numbers that go along with that, the migration rates, and how we go back every time and we still see that kelp until at the end, after a few times, it disappeared. So this is kind of a funny graph right here that has a lot of information in it. But basically, if you look at the orange bars in the back, that is the initial amount of urchins that were on those rocks. And if you look at the blue ones in the very front of that, that is the prescription of the on that target. So you can see how for each of our targets, they approach the prescription, right? We go there, we make them right to the prescription, then we come back 2 weeks and there's some more, and so we bring them back. So we assume that between the 2 weeks they approached at a regular rate, so that the actual gradient is a little bit higher, is kind of between the two, kind of an average. But you can see by the shape of this that it's kind of like a bowl shape. I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe, but that's a pretty good indication of pretty good success, that we were able to keep them off. And usually what happens when we do see a lot of urchins on a target is because there's some drift algae that went up against the target and kind of got stuck there. I say target, but it's a rock, right? Goes up against the rock, and then all the urchins will come over there and start eating it. They'll cross the sand to go to the kelp and start eating it, right? And then we'll find a couple extra 100 urchins that are eating that kelp at that time. And this is the results of the summer here. What we would like to see is that on the left side of this somewhere is all kelp coming back, and on the right side of this is kelp that could not persist. But what we found is that it all got eaten. So we conclude from this experiment that the purple urchin densities can be maintained close to the densities of our prescriptions, and that we did see some kelp recruitment. We saw kelp recruitment on little other rocks around, like it's like a little we call them sandcastle worm would be on the sand, and the kelp would recruit to that. So we know we had kelp, we had some spore availability around our sites, but the kelp that landed on our targets just didn't survive. So recovery might take longer than one summer to keep the densities at that level. And the red urchin densities, we were ignoring red urchins, but red urchins increased their numbers on our targets. They tripled their numbers on our targets because we were only removing purples, but you remember the reds like to cross the sand more readily than the purples. So the reds just took up the available real estate that we made by removing all the purples. So it became a problem, and you can see how the 0.7 or even 0.7 is more than enough red urchins to be above that threshold density of 0.6 that I had mentioned earlier. So there's already too many red urchins on the target to start, and it just got more. So red urchins removal might be necessary, and this next coming year, that is what we're going to do. We're going to remove the red urchins as well. So this is a recheck survey of purple urchins. I'm going to kind of take a step back. You've seen this already, but this is all the dive sites and all the purple urchin activity, and this is all the red urchin growth too on the same sites. You can see the similar thing happening at all of the sites in Monterey, that the red urchins are also going up, but these are different scales, right? If you put the two increases on the same scale, this is what you get. The purple urchins are up at that level, and the red urchins are at this lesser level, but they also increase from what they were at the baseline. And there's still too many red urchins for to reverse the state from barren to kelp. This is how the purple urchins are on our sites, and how you can. It's kind of difficult to interpret this, but this is how the purples are, and you can see that the reds are here, and then this is at the baseline. So initially they were here, and then it kind of went up. That's how you kind of have to see it. Like this is when we first started, they were this level, and then the next level they were more. It's up and down a little bit. This one's up, that one's down. But generally, we saw a lot more red urchins coming to our sites. And the other thing too is that it's also kind of a response. When you smash a lot of purple urchins, red urchins are carnivores. They come to that queue and will eat the carcasses of the purple urchins. So it kind of attracts red urchins to the site. But looking at it combined, all the urchins combined are above our design densities. When you add the purples and the reds, it's above that our design density. Now this is a little further. You can see how over the 3 courses, the red urchin densities went up to this level right here on the eighth pass, and the controls did also increase their numbers, but not as much. That's kind of the point I was making there. It seems almost like it went down because the red urchins on the controls went to the targets that had the urchins, the purple urchins that we removed and the carcasses on them. And this has an implication for the North Coast, because what happens is, further in Monterey, we had it pretty bad. We're at 21 urchins per square meter. On the North Coast, they have 66 urchins per square meter. That's just crazy. That's an average. A lot of places are even higher than that. It's just, urchins inches away from other urchins on the North Coast. It's just devastating. But they also have more red urchins, and they have more red urchins to begin with on their average here. And where our red urchins in 2017 were about 0.7, in Mendocino in 2017, they were double that. So my point of this is that this is not just a one species test, really, a one species removal effort. It has to be for both species of urchins to be effective. Basically, you're trying to have this rock, and you're trying to encourage some kelp to blow through the water and to land on this rock and to grow. And all you're really allowed to do is just stop some of the voracious herbivores from eating that kelp. And ideally, you want to remove everything from that rock. You want to remove the purple urchins, the red urchins, the snails, the abalone, anything that can stop your kelp from growing. You want to take it off that rock to encourage that growth. And anything less than that is just an incremental approach. So we tried the first increment of removing the purples, and now we're going to try the second increment of removing the reds also. This is wonderful volunteers. I think a couple of them are on here, and Melanie's on the line. I saw her there. These are the volunteers that came. It took just a little bit about volunteer effort. So it's kind of a 80-20 rule, where 20% of the divers do 80% of the work. It's just kind of how it goes with volunteer work. But we never were stopped for lack of divers. We always had enough divers to do our work, and we had a lot of divers put in some real effort to get it done. North Coast. So let's talk about the North Coast. I talked about a little bit about how they have 66 urchins per square meter. They've been getting some regulatory change. As a community, they started complaining about about all the urchins and the abalone fishery going away, and so they went to the Fish and Game Commission and they complained, and they got regulation change for them in May of 18 to increase the bag limit for recreational divers to 20 gallons per diver per day. And the following year, they made it even more. They made it 40 gallons per diver per day so that they could remove more urchins. Now, this year, in February of this year, the Fish and Game Commission did a real improvement in their strategy and allowed people to crush urchins at Casper Cove. This is Casper Cove up in Mendocino, and on the south side of that cove, and the north side for that matter, but on the south side of that cove, you can go there. There's a buoy set up, and crushing urchins is allowed. It was permitted in, I think, March 2nd, I believe. But right now it's a difficult time to get there because the beach is closed by the state. So you're not allowed to you can go near there, but you can't cross from Highway 1 to go into the water. So it's a problem for now until conditions change with the virus that we can get, people can go into the water there. These other areas are also being worked on. The Ocean Protection Council, which is a state body. There are basically 3 state agencies involved in all this work. There's Fish and Wildlife, there's the Fish and Game Commission, and then there's the Ocean Protection Council. The Ocean Protection Council has money. They get money from license plates, and they're political appointees, and they give money to work on these projects. They set policy with their funding, and they are funding removals to the tune of $800,000 to do removal work at Noyo Harbor and at Portuguese Beach by the Mendocino Headlands. This is being done by red urchin fishermen that are out of work, and they have suction hoses and a lot of expertise in divers, and they're going to go there and remove them. And Reef Check is going to be doing all the monitoring, all 3 of these projects, and they are being funded from the Ocean Protection Council for doing that work. The goal on the North Coast, as they stated in securing all these things, is to establish a kelp oasis along the North Coast. There is such complete devastation that the idea is to have little spots where the bull kelp can live, and then that way when conditions change, if there's a big disease or some urchin die-off for whatever reason, that you have a kelp genetic spore bank to replenish these areas. But the effort this year will be clearing urchins for next year because kelp has already spawned. The bull kelp recruits in March, and actually so do the urchins at the same time. But so anything that is done now will be to have kelp come back the next year. And as I told you before, after 2 weeks, they all come back. So, so the goal is really to clear the urchin barrens, to see if divers can go there and if they can develop a tool and techniques to clear large patches of urchin barrens at Casper Cove. That's more of the goal of the North Coast effort. And that brings me to the petition that I have for Monterey, and this is where your opportunity lies to come and do this. In Tankers Reef, which is the area that is just to the east of the wharf, municipal wharf here, and outside of the moorings, the harbor master asked me to put it over here. There's an area that is defined in the petition that used to have about 16 acres of kelp canopy on it in the past, and it has gone away. It's kind of a weird place. It's a flat shale reef. The depth ranges from 32 feet to 34 feet across almost the entire thing, and there's a little bit of macro on it right now, and it's good. If I can just mention that, is that where you have kelp is the best place to keep kelp. It's best that you don't run out of it and then have to start over from spores, because that's very difficult, very time consuming, very expensive to do that. So there is some macro here. If we can clear out the urchin barrens on the north side of that, then that macro can fill in that and provide habitat. If you kind of rotate this around a little bit, around the marina, and look on the other side of the marina, there is the Edward Ricketts State Marine Conservation Area. So this area is protected. You can only fish here by hook and line. You can't spearfish here, and but it is considered a conservation area. This is from 2007. This is what the kelp canopy looked like. Thick kelp canopy that you have to be careful when you swim through it, to how it is in 2019. Just a little bit of kelp left on it, and that's where we would like that Edward Ricketts Conservation Area to be part of this petition, to have recreational divers remove urchins in these areas, both the Tankers Reef and this area. Have recreational divers be permitted to remove them. And this is where the urchin barrens are out there at San Carlos Beach. They're along the wall and are in the shallows along the Middle Reef and further out, right in front of the aquarium. This is the Monterey Bay Aquarium right here, and people in here are looking out here into the kelp forest to see the otters there, and there's very little kelp for them to forage and to take refuge in that kelp. It's not just me saying this either. This is ReefCheck data that I've been putting out. But this is from Josh Smith. He is a PhD candidate for Dr. Mark Carr in UC Santa Cruz, and he did an extensive study where he dove for 3 years at about 100 sites between the breakwater and Point Pinos and counted the urchins and the density and the kelp in all these areas. And you can see from these two maps here, this one on the left, you can see that here is this kelp canopy in 2018, and the red indicates that there's a lot of kelp stipes in this area. This is a heat map, so it's kind of extrapolated from the many points that he did. And the high is over here at 12 stipes per square meter. And then you can see in 2019 how there's barely anything left out over here, just very low densities. And even the gradient has changed across the two. So the only place where there's really a lot of high density is out here at Otter's Cove these days. And what lives in kelp is otters, right? Otters enjoy that kelp. There used to be 300,000 sea otters along their range from Baja to Alaska. There used to be 100,000 sea otters in California. But this is the limit of their range at this time. San Nicolas Island has a pretty good, they were relocated to San Nicolas Island, and they're doing pretty well out there. But this is their range. They go from Pigeon Point down through Santa Barbara. And there are only about 3,000 sea otters at this time. They were almost extinct. There was just a small colony of them that survived the hunting that was done a long time ago. So, but the sea otters live in kelp. They forage in kelp. They're apex predators in that kelp. And in a normal condition, sea otters and kelp have been living together for thousands of years, right? They have maintained this kelp forest together, and they normally, in large enough numbers, you get enough otters per square acre or whatever you can, or acre, then you would be able to maintain a kelp forest. But when there's barrens, the otters won't eat the urchins in the barrens. That's an important distinction, is that the otters are not going to help the problem, but they can help to maintain a healthy kelp forest. I established a Facebook page that you can use to connect and blog about upcoming events. We just established this a few days ago, and a lot of followers are coming to it. It's becoming a bit of a movement. I use this page to get people to write to the Fish and Game Commission in support of the petition. I'm going to see if I can. So the Fish and Game petition is considering this petition that I just mentioned, and there is a meeting tomorrow at, it starts at 9, but it's likely that the agenda item that I'm talking about is agenda item number 12. And this is where you would go, this link right here, meetings at the Fish and Game Commission 2020, and you go down here, and this is how to join the teleconference that is tomorrow. And here are the instructions for it. Basically, it's a audio-only conference. You can just kind of listen in. If you want to provide public testimony for it, I certainly welcome anyone here or anybody else to call in and here's the number right here. And when you get in there, there's instructions here on how to do it. You kind of raise your hand by pressing #2, and then they will call on you, and your mic is muted. You have 1 minute to say your piece. And then I also have made a website for people to connect as well. I've just been kind of dumping in stuff up there as I come across studies and things and media and so on. This is the things that you can do. So first thing I would ask you to do, you can go to the meeting. It was on April 15th. I am already in error. They revised it to tomorrow, April 16th, is the meeting, and it's no longer in Sacramento. It's all by webinar. It's easy to attend. You don't have to go in person. Another thing you can do is join ReefCheck. Right now is training season for ReefCheck. We need some good volunteers in Reef Check to do a lot of the monitoring. There's a lot of efforts going to go up on the North Coast and also in Monterey, where we have a full season plan. We're adding more sites. We're adding Tankers Reef as a site. So it'd be good. People want to join Reef Check and learn about all these things in detail and become part of that the kelp forest monitoring effort and the urchin removal experiment. You can go there and do it. We're looking for people to come smash urchins. You know, if we want to have on the urchin experiment, we can have people come out in a group. If your buddy you want to come out, we can do some things where you're not counting urchins. You're more involved with the smashing and counting how many you did. And then if the urchin petition is accepted by the petition accepted by the commission tomorrow, sorry, then we'll have more opportunities for divers to do that in that experiment. And so what we were proposing for the petition is, before the virus came along, that we would have a large group of people go out there and go shoulder to shoulder and just clear urchins and go from here to there and clear them all. But with the virus now, we're going to have to do things a little differently. The way that's been suggested is to set a buoy out there and just kind of have a scheduling thing, or allow people to go out there in small pairs and buddy groups and go out there and do removal on these places, and do it with a hammer instead of trying to remove them from the water and give them to a guy in a kayak and give them to a guy on a boat, and then the boat goes to the dock and the dock goes to the dump and throws in the dump. It's much safer, and it's a much better use of the resource to just let it to smash it right there in the water and let it go back to the ocean. It 100% came from the ocean. It can 100% go back to the ocean. Also on this site, I have a place where you can stay informed about it. I have a newsletter that I put out periodically telling people about new opportunities. So do go there and to the website and sign up, and I will make you part of my list, and you can get notified. There's 75 people on the list. And another thing you can do is to become a scientist. This camera rig right here was made by Fei Lin, and she's actually on the call tonight. She's an 8th grader student from Fremont, California, and she entered her time-lapse photography of urchins in a science fair, and she received special awards from NASA and from NOAA for her work on the experiment. So there's lots of educational opportunities that go along with this effort here. So that's it for me. Thank you. Any questions?
As I am unmuting everyone so that they can verbally ask you all of their questions, a couple of questions came up about urchin biology. So some of those I think were answered in the chat a little bit earlier, but one that I was wondering if you could speak about a little bit more are people wanted to learn more about urchins, like what's their max depth, you know, how exactly does starving work? Do you have any resources where people could go to? And also, could you just tell us a little bit more about where urchins like to live? It sounds like not sand, but what else?
Right. Urchins like to live on rocky substrate, and basically the urchins like to live in cracks, and urchins prefer to eat. Their depth range is from basically about like 60, 70 feet and up. They can live in the intertidal. They can live in basically 3 meters of water if they want to, and they like to live in cracks and have their kelp delivered to them like a smorgasbord. Right? They wait for the kelp canopy to drop off leaves at drift algae. They also called detritus, and that sinks to the bottom, and they wait for it in the little cracks, and when the kelp comes in there, they eat it. That's a happy urchin. But what happens is they get so many urchins, and the kelp did not do very well, that they change their behavior. Now they're no longer waiting for the kelp to come to them. They go out looking for it. and they start openly grazing. And that's the change in behavior that is the telltale sign that an urchin baron is coming, because they will eat the holdfast of the kelp. And once that holdfast of the kelp is eaten, the rest of the kelp just goes away. It just ends up on the shore. And then the whole situation quickly degrades to they're eating all the algae on the rock. They even eat that little calcified algae, that little bubblegum stuff you see on the rock. Real estate in the ocean is very valuable, and so everything grows on that. But when the urchins are around, they'll eat that too, and they can be right down to bare rock. And that's what they're seeing a lot of on the north coast, is that a lot of areas are just urchins and rock. No longer have algae.
They're also eating the algae on the abalone and killing the abalone that way too.
Yeah, they can like eat right through the abalone. They can live on rocks, and a lot of people think, well, maybe they'll just starve themselves to death, right? They ate all the resource, how are they going to live? But urchins won't just die. They'll just keep on living. They're like become like these zombies, that sit around and they go into like a dormant state until some kelp recruits nearby, and then they kind of wake up and go eat it. And there's evidence that they can even eat right out of the water. I've heard where they have found that there was rocks that had been encased in colonial sand tube worms, and urchins were inside of there, underneath the colonial sand tube worms. Then when the colonial sand tube worms, they last a couple of years, and it comes off, the urchin's still alive. So you're not going to be able to outlast them. You're going to have to outwit them, right, in the game of Survivor here. Any other questions about urchin biology?
I think one other one that seemed really pertinent that came from the chat was, is it possible to basically replant kelp the way that we do reforestation efforts by, growing kelp on a farm and then planting basically sprouted kelp, for lack of a better term?
Sure. Great question. Yeah, this sort of thing has happened many times before. In Southern California, to give you an example, in Orange County, they didn't have kelp for 25 years. And so they started removing the urchins, and all the urchins ended up in the intertidal, and they had cleared this large area, and then they didn't have any kelp spores to go there, to plant that area. So what Nancy Caruso did was they grew kelp in the lab, in classrooms. They started this whole classroom effort all over Orange County, growing it in the lab, and then they tried 7 different ways to plant that kelp on the rock, and nothing seemed to work. It took 7 years of trying to get the kelp to work. They had burlap bags with spores in it, and they're swimming around trying to make them land and all that stuff. They finally got it to grow, but it didn't reach the surface. It ended up being about 5 feet from the surface, and they were so disappointed. They're like, well, why didn't it grow? But it was just kind of the way it was at that time, because you need cold water too. Conditions have to be right for kelp. You need to have this effort, this large persistent effort. Nancy Caruso and them 12 years to make this happen. This is not an easy thing. And finally, when the kelp, they got some cold water and the kelp came to the surface, that winter, that kelp washed up on shore, and the city of the beach sued her for that because they had never seen kelp before, and they didn't know what it was, and she did it. So go get the kelp lady and sue her, right? So now she had to realize that, well, I have to bring the people along. So she made Kelp Fest in Laguna Beach to try and change people's perception of kelp. And to go a step further, that's kind of a cautionary tale for us too, for the North Coast, is that if by the time they want an abalone fishery to come back, but best estimates are 30 to 50 years to have a abalone fishery return on the North Coast, and that's if you get kelp today. So what's it going to be like for the abalone fishermen 30 years from now? I mean, are they even going to be around? Are people going to even know what an abalone is? Are they going to really appreciate that culture that was lost? I don't know. Any other questions?
somebody was asking if there was any predators besides sun stars. Obviously, otters, but what else other than otters?
Yeah. So
And
predators are kind of in short supply in Monterey. We don't have many. We're getting more. As it turns out, otters are normally eat a lot of urchins. It's a large percent of their diet normally. But the otters in Monterey are in poor condition. They spend 40% of their time foraging as opposed to 20% because they're not eating these urchins. But we do have some predators. Wolf eels. Not a lot of wolf eels around. And we have sheephead, which we're getting more of, that have kind of come with the warmer waters, have brought more sheephead, and sheephead do eat urchins. They're kind of funny. They kind of try to flip them over and eat the bottom side. It's kind of a neat behavior. If you're ever out and you smash an urchin, you'll see sheephead come around like crazy. The other thing that also is lobster. And we don't have a whole lot of lobster, but we have seen a lobster on our site, and we were able to visit it a couple of times. So people will get more lobsters in Monterey. It's kind of the warmer water brings these changes. So those are the predators that are really available. The sunstar would be wonderful to have. We haven't seen it in years. There's been some small ones that have been seen. We don't know if they make it to adulthood with the sea star waste species. That's still present. But there is another sea star, the leather star, is an urchin predator as well. But we're talking about smaller urchins. Sea stars eat smaller urchins, and the sea otters eat the big urchins. But in terms of a conservation effort, much better with sea otter being your poster child for your conservation effort than it is to have a wolf eel as your conservation effort. Wolf eel, we love them, but everyone else thinks they're ugly. So it's hard to make a conservation effort over a wolf eel. But otters, everybody loves the otter, right?
So I have a question. How do sea urchins find the kelp? Do they smell it and follow a chemical trail, or what?
Exactly. They're following chemical cues. Some of their behavior is to move towards kelp. They can smell that cue, and they go to the dead kelp first. Is kind of their preference. There's some other studies I could show you that was done by Casey Sheridan and Zach Randall from the Oregon University of Oregon, where they put the urchins in these cages and had dead kelp and live kelp, and they preferred the dead kelp. So they moved towards that kelp, and they towards the dead kelp more readily. But they also have another cue, which is interesting, is that if you smash a purple urchin, the other ones will run away. They have this chemical cue. They're like, "Oh no, they're killing people!" So they all run out. So, yeah, it is something weird too. They where this is. I'm gonna go off a little bit, but some of the times you see the urchins, they come out of a hole and they have they put a shell on their head. You've probably seen this. You're like, what is that? Like a little abalone shell or something that they found in the hole, and then when they come out of the hole, they kind of keep it on top of like a little umbrella. And it kind of makes it hard to find them because they're kind of camouflaged in a way, So that may be a kind of a evolutionary survival trait for urchin smashing. Is the ones that use the umbrella survive, and the ones that don't survive. So like on some of our targets, some of these urchins have survived the urchin lottery 8 times. So maybe they know something.
They're hiding from their predators.
That's right, and predators could be us. So.
So could they build like a trap where they put kelp inside a mesh, and then the urchins kind of like the lobster, they go into a cage.
A roach hotel.
Just
can't get out.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, there's been some effort about that. I actually have something that was, if I could bring it up quickly here. I called it search urchins Norway. I'm just going to take 1 second. I'm going to have to bring it over to this screen here. So this is actually what they call the urchin taco. Can you see my screen okay? So this is from Norway. Norway has done a lot of work with urchin. It's a problem there too. And they have developed these ways of putting these little nets out there, and they put strings of them out, and they recruit them with kelp and to these nets, like you say. And here they are when they're trying different levels of kelp on them. It's an experiment, so they're trying to see how they could do it. Here's some where they use bait, see if they can get the urchins to come, and then how they were underwater. And I'm sorry, I wanted to show you. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. Flashing by you. Sorry, I'm not finding it. There's a picture of another net too. But anyways, you kind of get the idea. It's like a long net. They put kelp on it. So, yeah, passive urchin fishing.
Could we make like a type of like kelp cluster or bed and then like attract the urchins to there and then call them? Would that be possible?
Yeah, that was another method that we were talking about with Zach Randall. I was trying that as an experiment perhaps in one of these areas that we're already doing some work, is to put down like a detritus bed, like a little pillow, detritus pillow, and put kelp in there, and then attract them to those, and then once they kind of dogpile on that, then you go there and smash them because they're attracted to the kelp, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be a good way to do that. Another way there's all kinds of ideas kind of floating around, but you have to like have this. One thing is you have to have this kelp, right? So you have to have a source of food to suppress the urchins too, and where that source comes from, it may be difficult. But the other idea is to I'm looking for something else here.
So Keith, there are a number of abalone farms along the coast, and how is the lack of kelp affecting their operations? Do you know?
Yeah, I do know, because the Monterey Abalone Company is one of our partners in the special collection permit and the effort in Pacific Grove, and they've been really helpful, and they have a vested interest in this, obviously, because they feed their abalone 6,000 pounds of kelp a week. So they take a lot of that kelp, and there's been changes in the rules. Now they're no longer allowed to take macrocystis in all of California. They are only allowed to take bull kelp. So it's impacting their business pretty much. Last year, for the first time in their 27 years of being an abalone farm, they had to go to Santa Cruz to get enough kelp to feed their abalone. So it's very much of concern to them as well.
Even there.
I'm sorry?
I think that might have been a little bit of background noise.
Okay.
But thank you so much, Keith. This has been really, really wonderful. Tons of good information. Everyone is very anxiously awaiting to hear how the petition goes, how the ruling goes on that tomorrow. I had kind of thought, that divers are for this, and I had put out the shingle out there asking people to write letters to the commission, and I thought maybe I'd get like 50 people, but I'd heard from the Fish and Game Commission staff today that well over 260 people wrote letters to the commission. So this is a big deal, and a lot of people are stepping up, and everybody has to come along, because I'm not going to be able to do this by myself, and so we need all of your help, and we need to bring the diving community that needs to be aware of this and need to be part of the solution. I believe divers are part of the answer, and I encourage everybody to be part of that solution. Wonderful. Well, at this point, I'm going to stop stop recording the presentation. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're excited to see what the future of our local area looks like.
Yes. Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Lip Rippers. You guys are awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really,
Thank
really
you.
great.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Really